In this section, we're going to take a look at the included VSTs within Studio One. So I'm going to come over to the browser here and just click on the Instruments tab, and let's go ahead and expand out the Personas folder. Now, Studio One comes with 5 different virtual instruments, and this includes Impact, Mai Tai, Mojito, Presence, and Sample 1. These can each be used for different purposes, and we're going to take a look at each one briefly and cover their uses and some of the basic features. So let's start at the top with the Impact here. Now, as we've seen, we can always just click on an instrument and drag that into the Arrange view here, and an instrument track will be created, and our device should be ready to go. We can also click once and expand out the presets and just choose a specific preset and just drag that in as well. So I will choose the Atmospheric Tech, drag that in, and let's close out the browser. Now let's just start from the top and work our way down and cover some of the features of Impact XT. We can see our preset here is loaded up that we dragged in. At any time we can click on the down arrow here and choose a different kit. We then have a pad focus, so if I trigger the Impact using my external controller, we can see that our waveform display stays on the currently selected kick here. If I choose pad focus, then whenever I trigger, we will update to whatever pad we've triggered with this. We have our Personas logo that we can click on repeatedly to change the skin for Impact. Now next we have a waveform display that will show the currently loaded sample for the selected pad, and we have these markers where we can choose what portion of the sample that we'd like to play back. We can click, hold, and drag up and down within the waveform display to zoom in and out. We also have a slider to accomplish the same thing. We can reverse our sample. We can normalize. We have our file name that's currently loaded. We can even move to the previous or next sample within the folder that this is pulled from. We can change the color of our pad here. Let's choose this reddish color. We can click to rename. And let me spell that correctly. Now here we can set the keys or pads that will trigger our actual pad, and if you notice here in the upper left corner of each pad, we have a key listed. So this is C2, but we can click and input a different key. We have 2 spaces where we can put these keys in, and we can actually just highlight the field, press a key or pad on our controller, and it will populate that field for us. We next have the trigger mode. We can choose between one shot, loop, and normal. If we select normal, then that will make use of the envelope within our amp section here. I'll come back to one shot. If we'd like to change the sample that's currently loaded on a pad, we can click on the plus symbol here and then choose something from a folder where we may have drum sounds. I'll go ahead and open that up. And when we do that, if you notice, we actually have these 2 panels up top. I have loaded that new sample in addition to the one that was currently there. And now that we have these 2 different samples that are loaded, we can actually choose the layer mode so it could be based on velocity, and we can adjust how these respond to the velocity by clicking on the border up above. We could choose round robin, which will cycle between the loaded samples. We can choose random, or we can choose stack, which will play both samples at the same time. Next we have choke, and we have up to 32 different choke groups. So any pads that we place within a choke group will keep the other from playing back at the same time. We then have a follow tempo. So let's come to a different bank here, bank B, and just note that we have 8 different banks of 16 pads. And on our bank B, we have some loops that are loaded in here. So if I click and hold, we have this loop loaded that has BPM data included in it. So when we choose the follow tempo, that will adjust its playback to whatever we have our song tempo set to here. So if I go ahead and change this to 90 and then re-trigger, we can hear that then adjusts itself to the new tempo. Let's come back to bank A. Now at the bottom of our sample controls, we have all notes off. So if you have a particularly long sample that you've loaded into a pad, you can always click the all notes off to stop its playback once it's been triggered. And taking a closer look at the pads here, we can see that there is solo and mute available on each pad. Then we have our routing. So if we click here, we can choose to send this pad or any pad out to a different channel, whether it is stereo or mono. Moving on to the right here, we have pitch control. So if I trigger this kick here, we can transpose by semitones. We have a tune which will work in synths. We have envelope controls. And in the center area, we have a filter that we can activate by clicking on this LED here. And we have a variety of different filter modes. We have low pass, high pass, and band pass that are available here. And just above that, we have our filter cutoff. So let's go ahead and select kick 1. I'll go ahead and activate the filter. And then we can filter out frequencies using the cutoff and by choosing a different mode here. We have our resonance for the filter cutoff, drive, and punch. And then at the very bottom here, we have our amp section where we can control the gain for each individual pad, its panning, and our attack, hold, decay, and release controls. Now, the last thing I'd like to mention is that when we were working with this rename up above and I clicked the plus symbol, we saw that that then adds a new sample to our pad in addition to the ones that are already there. If we would like to simply load a new sound, we can always right click and choose replace sample, and we're taken to our dialog here. I can then choose a sample, open that up, and now we've loaded that one single sample. We can also come over to the browser and let's come to our files. Here I have a folder with drum sounds. I can click, hold, and drag that over, and in this way we'll only load that one sample as well. And so this has been a look at Impact, and up next we're going to move on to My Tai. And I'm actually going to Shift and T to remove that track out for our Impact. And let's go ahead and drag in our My Tai. I'll close out the browser, and this should be good to go. We've got our sound. I'm actually going to come to the presets area here and click on Initialize to take it back to an initialized state. So the My Tai is a polyphonic virtual analog synthesizer that can be used to create leads, pads, and bass sounds, and it has 2 oscillators, 2 LFOs, and 3 envelopes. So again, we're going to start from the top and just make our way down and cover some of the main areas. And if it seems like there's a lot going on here, by the time we're done, you should feel more comfortable with finding your way around. So here we have our 2 different oscillators, and every section here can be activated and deactivated by clicking on its title. And in the center at the top, we have a character section here. Again, we can activate and deactivate by clicking its name. We then have our filter section, our 2 LFOs, and then we have 3 envelopes here, one of which is permanently dedicated to the amp. Then we have 2 assignable envelopes below here. All the way to the right, we have global controls for volume, polyphony, and how many voices we can choose to play back or allow to play back at a time. At the bottom, we have a quality for our different sounds or for My Tai, and we can choose 80s, normal, high, and supreme. Going all the way up to the top here is going to be more intensive on your processor. So coming back to the top left here for our oscillator 1, we have a choice of different waveforms that we can start off with. Right now we're on saw, but we can choose sine, saw, triangle, or square. When we activate the square, notice that we have a new dial here for controlling the pulse width. Now I'll just come back to the saw. We can choose our octave. We can adjust tuning in semitones or cents. We have a level and panning. We can even add sub to this. So if I go ahead and play back and increase this sub, we can hear how that works there. If I'd like to decrease the octave, I can just click on this dial here. Now, oscillator 2 is going to have the exact same controls. At the bottom here, we have a noise section if we'd like to add a bit of noise with some color to our sound. The character section, we have a variety of different presets here, or styles that we can choose from. Okay, we then have our filter. We can choose from the different modes here, whether it's high pass, band pass, or low pass. So if I play back, right now we have our low pass selected. I can adjust the cutoff to take out some of those high frequencies. We have drive and punch. And our resonance. Next in line, we have our two LFOs, which we can assign to most any parameter within MyTie, and we'll come back to these in just a second. We've got our ADSR controls for the amp envelope here, so let me raise the cutoff a bit. If I'd like to turn this more into a pad, I can increase the attack. And our release time. And then we have our two envelopes, which, as with the LFOs, we can freely assign. And so let's go ahead and take a look at those now. We have a modulation and effects panel. So if we click on that, we can access it here. The top two are for adding different effects, and we have a bank A and bank B to choose from. In bank A, we have modulation. And again, by clicking on the title, we can activate and deactivate these different panels. So if I go ahead and activate the reverb, we can hear how that affects our pad. I'll go ahead and turn that off. In bank B, we have a gator for applying a gating effect to our sounds. We've got EQ, distortion, and pan. Now next we have our modulation matrix. And this is where we can assign our LFOs or our envelopes to different parameters. And we can see here that envelope 2, which is here, is assigned to the filter cutoff. I'm actually going to change this, and we can select our control here. So I want to change that to LFO1 to the filter cutoff. And then here we have a slider to control the amplitude and polarity for our modulation. So I'm going to move to the left here, take that pretty high for the amplitude to make this very obvious. Let's turn up our rate here, and we have a LED that's going to kind of give you a visual indicator of what your setting is for the LFO. But as we adjust, you can see the display will show the hertz that we're currently working with. So now that we've made those adjustments, we should have some modulation for our cutoff. If at any time we'd like to bypass some modulation that we have going on, we can just click on the buttons up above here. Now I'll go ahead and close out this panel, and next we have a virtual keyboard. So this is just going to show the keys that are currently being depressed. We can also click on the keyboard directly to play back our sounds. We then have our pitch bend and mod wheels, and for the pitch bend we can actually set how much this will affect our sound. So right now, if I go ahead and play back with the setting of 2, we increase or decrease by 2 semitones. If I go ahead and put in 5, I'll press enter and play back again. And that is how this bend control works. And so that's an overview of our MyTie. Next in line, we are going to take a look at Mojito.